Hello and welcome to Rowing Data. I am Lou Harwood, and today I am joined by my co-host Henry Palmer for this week's episode.
How we doing? Welcome. Started. This is our first podcast, so thought we might just quickly introduce ourselves before we do too much, as we're all just getting to know each other here. So, Lou, why don't you tell us who you are?
Sure, can do. So obviously, as you said, my name is Lou Harwood. I started rowing in high school. Quickly fell in love with the sport and decided that I wanted to continue on and row in college. And so, I came to Boston. I rowed on the Charles. I studied computer science and business. After I graduated, I became a software engineer and wanted to continue rowing, and that's where I met Henry. You were forming some competitive boats with some recent grads in the area going to Henley. And that's our first interaction, was the athlete-coach relationship.
Awesome. And I'm Henry Palmer. Similar background. I started rowing here in the States in high school and jumping in big eights and things. I was fortunate enough to quickly be introduced to sculling. Did that for right out of the gates, and went off to the NESCAC and rowed there, and then was fortunate enough to be able to head back across the pond to the UK, where my family's from, and rowed there for a number of years. Got to kind of learn how they do it, a little bit differently over there, sort of the club system, sort of their training, their whole training centers and everything, which was fantastic. After a number of years, I came back to the States, to Boston, and started coaching here. Met Lou, just got involved in the Boston rowing scene, which was awesome, and have just tried to stay involved ever since. I now work in marketing, digital marketing, so I spend a lot of time in data and analyzing pieces. But that's who we are, and we're excited to have you joining us. So this is, as I mentioned, this is our first podcast of a series on data in rowing. We're pretty excited to have this getting going, and our goal here is to really just explore all different facets of data in rowing, whether it's from statistical to telemetry or to other pieces. We're excited. We're going to dig in, and hopefully over the series we're going to start to learn about these different things. Lou and I have both sort of experienced a lot of these different pieces ourselves. And then we're also going to hopefully do some research on it and just engage and talk about what's out there. However, before we get too far along, this podcast series wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So we just want to give a quick shout out to them and recognize who they are. Just kind of tell you about them quickly, and then we'll get on with the show. But really excited to have them supporting this and helping us push this forward. So our first sponsor is Rose & Thorn, makers of active sports bras with a difference. They make a sports bra for the everyday active woman. If you're interested, you get a 10% discount using the coupon ROW10 at the checkout. The website is www.roseandthorn.com.
Cool. Our second sponsor is Just Strong, which is an athletic lifestyle brand for strong women. They offer encouragement, support, and to never give up. Just Strong athletic lifestyle brand. Their website is www.juststrong.com, and you get a 10% discount when you buy using the coupon code REBCARO10, which is REBCAROE10, and you'll be supporting RowingChat.
Awesome. And our final sponsor is Mind Games, a book by Annie Vernon. Win yourself a personally signed and dedicated copy of Mind Games book, which is all about how elite athletes train their minds to help them win in sport. To enter, tell us what gives you the impetus to win by writing a comment on the page. rowing.chat/win-mindgames-games-book. And if you buy a signed copy, you can buy them at rocktheboat.uk. You can find both links on rowing.chat/sponsors. So that's our sponsors, and these are the great people that help us make this podcast series possible. So one of the things before we get too deep into it, what we wanted to talk about out of the gates was basically, Lou, different topics in the rowing data space. Different opportunities out there. So why don't you give us a few of them, and we'll talk through some of what's out there.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of areas we can touch upon, but one area I think is particularly interesting that we can start with is collecting the data. I mean, so there's a lot of tools coming out. I mean, people generally know about Cox boxes, NKs, the speed coaches. There's other brands out there. We're starting to get into biometric data, heart rate, depending on how closely you track a food log. But a big piece of this is making sure you're not only collecting this data, but the way you go about collecting it is you have standards in place. You can't just casually collect. I ate some chips today or something. We did this piece today, and not have it be carefully recorded. Otherwise, when you're going to do your analysis later, I mean, you may the quality of the results may not be good. So you have to be very careful about how you're collecting this data, what you're collecting. There's a lot of mess that can get involved in that. I mean, you're sifting through things. That's a big part of your job, actually. Is just maintenance of this
So you're reminding me of the term that you and I have talked about being a data janitor.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. So
and cleaning it up and making sure that what you have there is sensible. Agreed.
I mean, I've heard at different talks here and there that a data scientist's job, 50% of it can just be cleaning the data. Making sure the data you're collecting it doesn't have bad values, making sure the values generally make sense. Doing a sanity check. Like if you're collecting heights, you don't see someone that's 3 centimeters tall, as an example. And then you can go do your analysis. Another piece of this is to make sure, say, let's go back to biometric data or rowing, your athlete-related data. If you collect something like a heart rate through a strap or something like that, that may be one thing. But if you start collecting sleep-related data, if you start tracking how an athlete is sleeping or how long they're sleeping or sleeping patterns, that may get a bit more invasive. And
now we're starting to kind of touch into ethics in a way. And Lou mentioned, obviously you studied computer science stuff. I actually studied philosophy in college, so this is an area that I love to talk about.
Yeah,
but it's an interesting piece, right? That how far do we take it, and what's ethical to measure there? Obviously, there's some advantages, but as you said, you used the word invasive. Like, how far does that go, and is it too much?
Agreed. I mean, another aspect to the ethical collection of data, which I've come across more frequently, is scraping unstructured data from websites. You need to make sure they don't have either in their terms of service or something called like a robots.txt file, something in place to say please don't scrape our website, that you typically look for if you're trying to ethically scrape a web page. And also, you don't want to hit their web page 10,000 times in a minute, or some example like that. I mean, you have to be careful about how you're doing it so you don't crash the subject. So I think that's a big piece of it as well, which we can definitely go in depth into. And so once you have all this data, I mean, the really interesting stuff starts to happen. I mean, you get it, you clean it, and then you can start to look at it, and then, that's where you can say, what type of insights can we get from this? Are we if you're collecting data and you can see that, are the power curves of your athletes all making the same shape? Are there real issues there that you couldn't have seen just with your eye? And I think that's something I remember you were saying you looked into when you did a bit of coaching. After we weren't part of the same club, where you were looking at the power curves of your athletes and trying to.
It's an interesting piece because you can also, and this is what's so cool about this data stuff, is the ability to sort of develop a hypothesis and then use the information to affirm that, and to basically take a logic-based approach to how you want to approach your rowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what all these various subjects that you just kind of briefly touched on, this ability just to bring a greater lens to an examination to what it is that you're trying to do, and having that greater understanding.
Great. Yeah, there's a brief cut out there, but I think I got the gist of it. It sounds like you're just talking about the using data and the analysis to get a deep understanding of what's going on into the boat, and not just at the surface.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
So cool. So one of the things, I think, you just touched on so many different areas there, but one of the things that, we thought tonight in sort of chatting about this, how to open up a podcast series on data, was basically start with a 30,000-foot view and ask the simple question: why should you care about rowing data? Clearly, you get in the boat. We have all this new technology developing, new toys coming into the marketplace and so on. Obviously, rowing's been around for a very long time, and people have been very successful without it. So, what are these pieces, and how do they fit into the mix? But really, before that, asking that question of why should you care about this stuff. So, what do you think, Lou?
So I think it's interesting. We've discussed this, where you may see either a coach or an athlete or a spectator who watches a race, and you say, what's going on with that boat? And everyone just shrugs their shoulders and say, I have no idea. And as a coach, you want to be able to know, like, was that performance on par with how they've been? Or was that a bad performance? Did something happen? What's going on? You want to shrink the number of question marks you have in your head, and not just wonder, I thought they were going to do so much better.
Yeah.
It's like not studying for the final and then saying, I have no idea why I did so poorly. Well, you got to do your homework ahead of time.
And we talked about this concept of, what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah.
And if you're not, and you're exactly right to bring, back the idea of like doing your homework, or, preparing for the exam. It's the same type of process, in my opinion, where, you do this preparation, you measure these pieces, and then you're better set up to be able to manage them, throughout the course of the season, and, and then actually make it, make inferences, make logic-based decisions, and, as squad sizes grow, as you're managing more athletes, and how can you bring a basically objective approach to making decisions. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right there.
Totally agree. Yeah, and I think it's not just about recording the data on pieces of paper, but it's making sure that if there's multiple factors in play, you have a system in place to record these. And that way, if you're saying, okay, we're doing this 2-mile piece, and I'm comparing it against a 2-mile piece from last year, were the conditions the same? Was it the same point in the season? Qualitative things. The morale of the team isn't as quite as high as it was last year. The things you can. Not just hard numbers, but things that you should be measuring, yes, but then also taking note of, and that way you can say, okay, go ahead. You look at your.
How many times you go on the water and you do a workout, and if the coach isn't taking a time or something like that, you have no record of what that was. And 2 weeks later you do the same thing again, and maybe you went faster, and you have to be able to sort of, if you really want to be constructive about it, keep a log of these pieces. And I think what's interesting is also, and more for a later time, but we're seeing more and more opportunities with devices, with GPS, with all these other monitors to actually really actively track those things. How often is it, do you go for a run and turn Strava on, for example? And now like next time you do it, how you compared, and all of a sudden you have a better picture of your performance. And I think that we're seeing that same thing happen in rowing. And one of the very cool things about some of the technology that's developing is it's just giving coaches more tools in their toolbox to help make informed decisions and to help improve their crews and to help educate.
Agreed. I think it's so interesting that rowing is considered such a team sport, and the team level you can look at boat results, and at the individual level you can look at the power on the oar or the erg score of the person in the boat. But without a good data management system, it's hard to say what combinations of athletes are quantitatively making the boat faster.
And I think we should be clear, though. We're not necessarily talking, or at least in my opinion, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, there are a lot of different ways to do this. But just from a rudimentary level, and a log, it doesn't you don't have to have necessarily a spreadsheet. Sorry, I think I tuned out a little bit there. I think you can have, basically coaches can have logs and so on and so forth. And this is a great first step to understanding what's going on and basically, measuring and then managing it.
Definitely agree.
One of the things that you and I were also talking about, though, which I think is important to bring up here, is the question of what is the role of the coach, and how do they fit into this equation, right? Because now you have these new devices and these new inputs and your ability to measure these things. How has that shifted? How does it supplement coaching? All of these different pieces. What have you seen?
So I think that's a really great point you're making. So in high school, I was unaware of most things, like any typical high school student.
As we are.
You go in the boat, the coach and the coxswain basically tell you pull harder, and that there's a million things you can do to fix your technique. I tended to appreciate that approach of just telling us there's always more to be done. But then as you get to college, you find that at least when we were competing, it's much tighter. Everyone is already very driven, trying to be their best, and the coaches are they're more closely monitoring things, or at least I was more aware of it. And I think all of a sudden you're hearing about, okay, hey, we were doing this 2-mile piece last year or last week or some other point in time. This is the time standard at these rates. And then you think, it's interesting that we have that score. There's no telling how tired we were compared to that point last year, or were there other factors in play that would lead to success of the previous year versus this year. But it's interesting to see, like, hey, we knew what the end result was, how we finished last year, and this is where we were at that point. I think it's a job of a coach to say, you've got all these factors in play with the numbers and the times and individuals you're working with, and that maybe in high school or college or even afterwards when you're working a job, you have stresses throughout your day, and you can only push people so hard. You have to be careful of not only measuring everything, but then also realizing there's human beings in the boat. And
I think one of the things that you just sort of touched on there that I've heard a few times, and I think is really important from a coaching perspective, is what data now and technologies allowing us as coaches to do, or allowing any coaches out there to do. And I come back to something somebody told me once, which was you can tell an athlete to do something 10% of the time, or you can show them.
Would you?
Doing.
I'm just going to interrupt you real quick. Would you mind just restarting that? There's a brief cutout, so you can.
Yeah. No.
You can tell an athlete to do something, or
you can tell an athlete to do something, and they may remember it 5-10% of the time. You can show an athlete, what they're doing, and so on. And they're more likely to remember it. Now we move up to maybe it's 50% of the time, and the changes happen and so on. Or the final step is you can involve the athlete. And now all of a sudden you see they recognize what's occurring and they understand, and now the change actually becomes concrete. So, rather than say, Lou, it'd be really great if you put your blade in the water, and then that might resonate with you during the practice. We could also look at video, and I could show you that you're not putting your blade in the water, and now it might sink in a little bit more. Or we can take the next bit, and we can really involve you in the process and say, hey, listen, Lou, you're not putting your blade in the water. Let me show you how you're not doing it, and let's engage in a way and look at the numbers and look at the impact when you do put your blade in the water. And now all of a sudden we've used technology and we've used data to actually make a difference. And it's not just oh, Henry was telling me that I should put my blade in the water, and maybe he's right, maybe he's just being mean or something like that. And it elevates the entire discussion, and it just gives this coach a incredible tool to help move those things along. It's a huge piece of it is the understanding, right? It's not that you're actively not trying to put your blade in the water potentially. I mean, maybe you are, but that's right. That's an interesting piece here, that now coaches can basically have a more informed, more engaged conversation with the athletes.
So I think on that aspect too. I mean, so I've been in boats, and you're not the only coach who's ever told me I need to get the blade in the water, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. And in college, I remember hearing that, or another phrase about some way I need to improve my technique. And if I started making the change, I'd get the coach would say, yes, it's good, and then usually someone would come up to after me and say, hey, I felt that was really good. Yeah. And that's there's so much going on in the boat with at least in a men's heavyweight 8, there's a lot of forces being applied there.
A
lot of mass floating around. Yeah. And I mean, it was very uplifting to hear that, but I think if I could, if I had seen data of the coach saying you are letting the team down every time you're not putting the blade in because you are slowing the boat down, X percent. And then I could say okay, I mean, my thought was before, I need to pull it as hard as I can. And doing that, I am slowing the boat down, whatever percent, and then I could say, all right, the focus needs to be rowing in time with these guys, and then the boat's faster than that boat. Then we're going back to the whole purpose of this is saying, well, what's the best way to get the boat from point A to point B as fast as possible.
Yeah, we should have brought that up earlier, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do here with all these tools: is how do we move from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And for me personally, I want to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, ideally in front of the competitors, and in a perfect world, having expended as little energy as possible. If I can do it more efficiently, right? If we can have a think about that,
especially in a multi-day regatta. I mean, you're burning a lot of energy doing 2K after 2K. You have to win or qualify as easily as you can.
Exactly.
Or the alternative, I guess, is if you're seated poorly, you can be a hero on day one, but then that's a different goal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think, one of the final things is we, because you and I can obviously talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
The other question I would ask is, what is the opportunity cost of not looking at this information, right? What are you leaving on the table? And you and I have talked a lot about the time commitment with a sport like rowing, how much you're putting into it, going down the boathouse, all this stuff that goes around it, and thinking about how you're being efficient and, basically maximizing what you're putting into the sport. And I think personally that if you're not looking at this stuff, you're leaving money on the table every time. What do
Yeah.
you
So I think with the amount of volume that goes into competitive rowing with the training, it's really easy to overtrain the athletes if you don't have a game plan in mind. How are you doing this? How are you measuring how the boat's getting faster? You need to be as efficient as possible. And they're either usually in class or some sort of job. You can't waste their time.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, like you said before, it's great if you can tell them something. It's even better if you can show them afterwards, or if they can get instant feedback during practice. That is the best. If you can show them, you are almost in the same power curve as everyone else in the boat, but we'll get faster if you do this instead. And then you can reinforce that later. I think it takes a lot of the guessing out of the coach's mind by just having the data laid out, and then they can focus on the human aspect more.
Absolutely. And I was sort of, you reminded me of an experience I had at university where, one year we were completely rubbish, and the next year we were, much, much better, infinitely better. And it's not necessarily that the ingredients changed, and it's not necessarily that the time commitment changed. There was efficiency and an acknowledgement of what was going on, and using information to basically to optimize the work we were doing. Hugely important when you're dealing with students. And how can we do all this and so on. So no, I think it's absolutely, it's exciting, and it's exciting to see this evolve. So I mean, I know that's kind of, you and I had talked about wanting to take a 30,000-foot view and ask those questions today as we get this series started. What do you think?
I think that's a good overview. I mean, we talked about laying the framework of this podcast. We want to discuss not just all the cool toys and tech out there, but what are good ways to collect the data, and how does it make you faster? You don't collect toys for the sake of having toys all the time.
Well, not all.
All the time, yeah, not all the time. And so then we went into talking about what are the missed opportunities by not doing data management, data analysis. And I think overall that was a good first overview of how we want to go with this. So do you have any other remarks before we close this out?
No, I mean, just, I hope that anyone that tuned in, would love to have you join us again. We're pretty excited about this stuff and wanting to, dig deeper into it. So please come back. Lou and I will be here. We're always chatting about this stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes we record it. So we thought we'd get a start to it.
Very cool. All right. Well, just to reiterate, Rowing Data is part of the RowingChat network. You can get email notifications of new shows by joining our mailing list at www.rowing.chat. Listen to other shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts. I can't read. All right. Till next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lou. Thank you, everyone. This is fun. We'll do this again.
All right. I think that's it. Bye, Henry.